So, as I've said, we are talking through our core values as a congregation, as a community of faith, things that we find rooted deeply in Scripture that help us to figure out how we make choices and navigate our way through this world in which we live. We have talked about the inclusive welcome of God and the showering of God's grace that comes with that. We've talked about what it means for us to continue to grow and to mature in faith, always moving towards progress rather than perfection. Today, I want to talk about generosity, and here's the problem with talking about generosity. I say generosity, and you think of what? Money, right? Like that's where everybody's mind goes. Pastor's talking about generosity. We must be behind on the budget, right? Some places, pastor's talking about generosity. He must need a new car in some churches. There's a problem with us where we tie this idea of generosity to money, and in particular to material wealth, right? Like if you're generous, and generosity is about money, it's a whole lot easier to be generous if you're, wealthy. So we could talk, for example, about Phil Knight. Phil Knight, if you're not aware, is the founder of Nike. He's made a little bit of money over the years. And he's well known, especially in the Pacific Northwest, for his great material generosity. He supports schools and nonprofits, and isn't that fantastic, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. Hundreds of millions of dollars, and he's still estimated to be worth some $32 billion. It's awful easy to be generous when you're from a bigger pot, isn't it? But also, as we think about generosity, Phil Knight is generous to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, which he earned during a time when Nike was best known for engaging in practices of slave labor and unpaid labor across Asia. How generous is it to run sweatshops? Really? How generous is it to pocket billions of dollars while children are earning pennies a day in your factories? Maybe generosity is more than just money. Or we think about Andrew Carnegie is another great example. Andrew Carnegie, if you don't know, was the founder of U.S. Steel, one of the largest corporations ever in the U.S. U.S. Steel was in its heyday when railroads were being built, and we entered into World War I and then World War II, turning out steel and steel manufactured products. Andrew Carnegie's name is still known as a benefactor through the Carnegie Corporation, the Carnegie Institutes and Foundations to support in particular libraries and educational institutions long after the death of Andrew Carnegie. Of course, U.S. Steel across the South and in Birmingham in particular engaged in the practice of convict leasing to earn their billions, wherein, after the end of slavery, across the South in particular, black codes sprung up, and it was easy to get arrested for vagrancy or loitering or being unemployed, and then get assigned to go to prison, and the prison would lease you out to corporations for pennies a day, like U.S. Steel. And so U.S. Steel, rather than employing union workers, would employ prisoners. Isn't that generous? Maybe generosity is more than just money. At the end of the day, as Scripture talks about generosity, generosity has very little to do with our wallets. The generosity of material wealth and of money is a side effect. Generosity is about our hearts. Generosity is an attitude of our hearts, not a thing we do with our wallets. And we get caught up in this praise of those who throw around money and finances and material wealth when it costs them nothing, and when in fact their own hearts are hard and uncaring and unkind. Paul talks again and again about this idea of generosity, of a generosity of heart and a generosity of spirit. He says in Romans chapter 12, contribute to the needs of God's people. Yes, financially provide for people. But then also he goes, welcome strangers into your home, bless those who harass you, be happy with those who are happy, be empathetic, cry with those who are crying. Consider everyone as an equal, and don't think of anyone as better than yourselves. Don't repay anyone evil for evil, but live at peace with all people. You see, generosity of finances is like one thing out of a dozen. That's the problem when we talk about generosity as financial. Generosity looks like being generous with your time, being generous with your patience, being generous with the people you encounter during the day, even if there's no finances exchanged in the midst of it. Being generous looks like having the Spirit of Christ living in us and expressed through us. Being generous looks like treating others as we ourselves would like to be treated. Now, don't get me wrong. I think that what we do with our material wealth matters, and Jesus talks about it again and again and again and again, right? Like it's not a non-issue, but we have become obsessed with the money stuff. And so when people are freely giving of their money, we give them a free pass on being hard of heart, of being unkind, of being cruel, of being impatient, because, they wrote a check. What a sad understanding of generosity. What a sad understanding of what it means to love and care for our neighbors. It comes up again and again and again. Carry one another's burdens, says Paul to the Galatians. And if anyone thinks they are important, they're fooling themselves. You will reap as you sow. As you plant, so shall you harvest, in Galatians. So don't get tired of doing good. That's generosity. That's what generosity looks like. I've encountered check writing generosity as a pastor. Let me tell you about one of the members in the church that I served. And this member was retired. This member had health concerns. One of the older members of the congregation I served. And every Sunday, this member would put an envelope in the offering plate. Now, we had in this church people who wrote checks, who supported our ministry in ways that I could never imagine with the finances I live with. But this individual, every Sunday, with their check in the offering plate, would put in $10 because it's what they had. And if they missed a Sunday, they would put in $20, right? But it was the same every Sunday because it's what they had. It's the widow's mite. You know this story, right? That Jesus tells that in the temple there is this big offering box and it's metal, right? And paper money is new, so all the money is metal. And those who were wealthy would come up and they would drop their coins in and it would go clang, 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 clang. So everybody saw them giving money, right? So it drew attention to the ways that they were being generous. And look at how many coins Joe just dropped in. My goodness, he must be doing well. What a generous guy. Jesus says, look at that. Now watch this. And this widow walks up and she has her one little coin that barely makes a ding, but she drops it in. And Jesus says, do that. Be like that. The woman who gave not for attention, not for praise, not for being told how generous she is, but because it's who she is. Because it's part of how her heart is pointed. If we are generous with our wallets without changing our heart, nothing has changed. Nothing will change. But if we start by praying for God to fill us with a spirit of generosity, if we start with learning to be more generous with our coworkers when they get on our nerves, more generous with our family members as we gather for holidays, more generous with our time for those who are asking of it, more generous and kind to those we are on the road with as we drive to and from our destinations. More generous, more patient, more understanding of all those things. You see, Jesus knew what generosity looked like. How do we get to that point? What's the reason that we get impatient with people? Let's take an example. Why do you get impatient with someone? Someone wants to waste your time, right? Because they're asking a bunch of questions or they're spending too long in front of you bringing out coupons and their checkbook and their coins and all that at the grocery store, right? What's your frustration? Why do you get impatient? Because you're focused on yourself. Because you think you don't have enough time. Because you're worried about the things you have to do later. Stop worrying about tomorrow, says Jesus, because tomorrow will worry about itself. When we start from the attitude of abundance, of I have what I need. I have what I need. I have enough of everything. I have enough time. Yeah, sure, I'd love to get through this grocery store line faster, but where am I going to go really? Home? Where I have to unload it? You know what? Home will be there when I get there. Yeah, sure, driving to church today might take me 5 minutes longer because there's that guy on Research Forest who always drives 5 miles an hour below the speed limit in the left-hand lane. But I'll get there. And it might be, 3 minutes later than I wanted to. But is that such a big deal? I have enough time. Yeah, this person gets on my nerves and they have wronged me in the past, but you know what? I have enough kindness to share with them. I have enough love to share with them without belittling myself. Excuse me. Without belittling myself, without demeaning myself. I have enough. When Jesus talks about generosity in this passage that preachers like to talk about when there's not enough money for the budget, right? Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. He goes on to talk about why we get there. And it's because we live with an attitude of we have enough of all of it. What have I to worry about, to be angry about, to be upset about? To be impatient about, to be unkind about? I have enough. Stop worrying about tomorrow. Tomorrow has enough worry on its own. Tomorrow has enough trouble of its own. Generosity is not about your wallet. Generosity is about your heart. May our hearts grow like the Grinch on Christmas morning. 4 sizes. May we be filled not with just generosity of our material wealth, but generosity of heart, generosity of kindness, of patience, of time, of attention, generosity of spirit, in such a way that the world will look at us and say, I want what they have.